So before I take something into Substance, I need to make sure that I'm kind of setting up right for Substance Painter. And the only thing I need to do is just make sure that obviously all my object is finished. Everything's been UV'd. Everything's nice and clean. Because once I've taken the Substance, I can't necessarily easily replace the asset later on. So it's good form, it's good housekeeping for us just to make sure that everything's finished before I go to Substance. If you've only got one UV sheet for everything, then you're fine. You don't need to do anything. You just need to make sure it's all UV'd and finished. For this though, I've got 3 UV sheets. So what I've had to do is apply a different material per UV sheet. Because inside Substance, it doesn't see these individual UV sheets. It doesn't understand that. So I've got to separate it off by saying this UV sheet is attached to this material. This UV sheet is attached to this material. And that's very easy to do. So inside Maya, and obviously I'm recording this, inside Maya all I'm going to do is, in my UVs, and this is also easy because I've separated it out, I'm going to grab all one set of UV, like that. If I hold down right click, I've got our context menu. And then at the bottom of that, I've got assign favorite material. And then all I'm going to do is apply what we call a Lambert. I'm going to do a video on these separate materials because it's less important for us as game artists, but it's important just to understand these in case you ever want to do everything inside Maya and never take it into like Sketchfab or something. But a Lambert is like the basic of basic materials. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to do that on that UV sheet, and then I'm going to do it on that UV sheet, and then I'm going to do it on that UV sheet. And that'll give me 3 different materials. And what I've done is colorized them as well. So I've added color. So all my first group is red, second group is yellow, and my third group is green. Just showing you the separation. I sometimes do this in my own time anyway, just especially if I'm dealing with something where there's a lot of UV sheets. I do this because I'm a bit thick. So I can clearly see what's separated out. And also, it's really good for me if I'm doing lots of little things. If I see some gray areas, it means that those haven't been assigned to a different material. Or I might see something where it should be green, it's actually red. So that's really good for me to kind of like debug before I take into Substance. Because the amount of time I've taken stuff into Substance, be like, I've not set that up right. Yes?
I kind of missed a good chunk of that because I zoned out a bit.
Okay, try not to zone out. Obviously, try and keep focused. Yep. What did you miss?
You know when you just after the Lambert bit?
Yep.
How did you just select it and give it a different colour?
Yeah. So when you apply material to something, you'll get your attributes editor will open up, and you'll get given one of these Lambert tabs here. And all I've done there is just click color and apply one of these colors. You don't need to do that. I'm just doing that obviously for more of a visual thing, so you can clearly see the separation. Like that. And that way, when I take it into Substance, because all my UVs are going to be stacked on top of each other, it's going to understand this clump of UVs is to that material, this clump is to that material, da, 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 da. So when I've done that, I've applied my material, the attribute editor pops out, I've just clicked the word colour, I've clicked the box next to colour, and just chose one of the primary colours, just a bright colour. There you go. Nice bright colour. And then gone to the other ones, nice bright colour, nice bright colour. So for this I only needed 3. And yours is already set up with this, so you don't actually need to do any of this. This is already pre-set up for you. And then what I need to do is just make sure that all the UV sheets are on the right position, and then just export selection OBJ. And then we're good. Name your thing, whatever. But of course, remember, if you're just doing like the simple like cylindrical stuff, which is all based on one material or one UV sheet, you don't need to do that. This is only if you've got separate UV sheets. So, Substance Painter. I open up Substance Painter. I get this. So, welcome screen, whatever. And click off that. Click this off. Click dump display again. If you want like going for the tutorials, their official tutorials is good. You know, I'm not going to teach you everything to do with Substance. I'm going to teach you a chunk of it. But then they will also show you different processes. I'm going to show you some processes. They're going to show you different ones. So absolutely go through them. And there's stuff that you can go do. So, right. Photoshop and Substance Painter are very, very similar. We've got layer systems. Layers work exactly the same. One stacked on top of the other. The one on top is dominant, the one below it. Just like the layer systems in Photoshop, Procreate, Paint Shop Site, all pixel-based softwares. The difference being that we have a couple of different types of layers. We've got a paint layer, which is your basic layer, which you can paint on. But then instead of having a fill bucket, we've got a fill layer, which just means that the entire layer is dumped with one color. And what I'm actually going to show you is that I work with fill layers 99% of the time. I rarely go to paint layers. I do most of my stuff with fill layers. Unless I'm doing like hand-painted, painterly kind of texturing, then I'll do a paint layer, because then I need to be a bit more finesseful. But even then, I don't need to. So yeah, it's very, very cool. And the other massive thing is that obviously Photoshop is a 2D software. This is a 2D software, but with a 3D viewer in it. So don't try and don't get overwhelmed because you got a 3D thing there. It's just 2D. We're just basically seeing the texture wrapped on top of the object already. Okay. We don't need to make a project for this, which is awesome. It's only Maya we need to make projects for. So I'm going to go up to File. I'm going to go up to New. So File, New as per usual for everything. So how this all breaks down is the template is the pipeline that we're working on. So the pipeline might be from studio to studio. If you're doing something like Slime Rancher, you don't need a bunch of fancy stuff. All you really need is color and maybe some specularity. You can pick it up. You don't need many fancy things. What we're going to use, though, is the fancy stuff, because that's the cool stuff. So template, if we drop that down, you get a bunch of them. I just want us to use ASM PBR Metallic Roughness, that first one, but there's a bunch of stuff. There's even some stuff set up for, you know, if you want to take stuff into Dota, if you want to take stuff into Blender, or work with Blender, if you want to take stuff into Keyshot, which is a rendering software, if you work with Maxell, if you want to do so this one, this non-PBR specular glossness, that's like just really basic stuff. There's a lot of stuff in here. Some Unreal packages, some V-Ray packages, Unity, Spark, Roblox for some reason. Fucking Roblox. But all I want us to use is just the very first one, PBR Metallic Roughness, starter asset. Cool. And then File. That's where we actually choose what we're working on. So I'm going to click Select. I wish File wasn't all the way over here. Select. I'm going to find my particular thing. I'm going to select it. Now the rest of it, we do not need to worry about whatsoever. We're not bringing in additional maps, pre-made in other softwares. We're not bringing in cameras. Our things are automatically unwrapped. The document resolution is 1024. And I know I said that we were going to aim for like 496, 1024. No, sorry. 2048, 496 kind of area. One amazing thing about Substance Painter is that we can change the resolution of our object on the fly, which is amazing. Because there are certain things that if you're trying to work at a really high resolution and you do a really big process, especially if your computer's on the lower end of things, it's going to kind of take a while for that process to happen. But if you're just doing like, right, I just want to apply like a massive material to something, lower your resolution, apply it, and then up your resolution again. So it makes things a lot easier to use. So I'm just going to leave that as 1024. And that's it. All I'm going to do, like I said, is just change my template and then just add my file in. I'm going to click OK. There we go. So we've got a few things. Yours might look like... I'm going to reset the UI. Because I don't like the default UI. But it's going to look like this. So you've got your assets on the side here, which we have got things like smart materials, which a lot of people think, oh, I just need to use those. Smart materials aren't as easy as you think they are. They're not smart, they're quite stupid. There's a lot of work we have to do before smart materials actually work properly. A lot of work we have to do. And a lot of these sound like they're just perfect. Oh, I'll supply that and I'm done. That's not the case. Again, a lot of these are just starting blocks, the beginning points. But we're going to make this from scratch. So what I tend to do is either close this completely or just move it off to the side, because this whole UI is super customizable. So I'm going to drag this off, because there is a bunch of stuff inside here that I might use. So we've got like alphas, we've got things just like in Photoshop, we've got blurs, we've got hue and saturations, we've got color matching, as well as some other stuff purely related to 3D, but we're not necessarily going to be using a lot of them. We've got some alphas just like in Photoshop. You can bring Photoshop brushes into Substance, so any PSD brush that you like, you can bring it in. Kyle brushes are already in here, I believe. There you go. We've got a bunch of Kyle brushes. So they're all just all Photoshop brushes. You can see a little PS logo next to them. But yeah, I'm going to drag that off to the side just because it takes up real estate. And for me, my properties here is free real estate. My properties here is really important, but it's a really long menu, but it's really condensed by default. So what I'm going to do, hello Adam, is I'm going to drag this up and just dock it over here, because there's a load of stuff in here that I want to keep track of. But it's such a small, cramped menu on the side. Yeah. And then it frees up my layers. So here's my layers. So the UI, it's not as difficult. It's not as kind of as fancy as obviously Unreal, or if anyone's seen Maya or ZBrush or anything. It's very similar to Photoshop. We got some drop downs at the top. We won't be using them much at all. We've got some stuff to do with, in this case, because I've got some brush settings active. We've got size of brush, the flow of the brush, stroke opacity, basic Photoshop, Procreate kind of stuff. We've got some symmetry tools. So here we've got a symmetry tool that we can change that to be Y-axis, Z-axis, mirror axis, that kind of jazz. We've got some settings here that we can turn it to 3D only, or we can see the UV and the 3D object, which is going to be useful. And then we've got change it to perspective or orthographic. So remember, orthographic is without perspective. So that's why that's really good if you're doing anything that's specifically meant to be in an orthographic, isometric kind of world. You can put it into there to make sure that, does it actually look good while I'm texturing it? And then we've got stuff where you can free rotate, constrain rotation, never change this. And you can even go to a renderer. So you can render some pretty pictures inside here. So this is Iray, and it's something called a progressive renderer. Whereas if I just leave it alone, it's going to, as you can see, some iterations are topping up there. It's refining the image as it goes on and on and on and on and on. And it's pretty good. So it's decided that 188 iterations is good enough. So it's really good. It's being lit by the HDRI, just like in Sketchfab. We've got this HDRI, this high dynamic range image. And I can change this. So we can write like that. Now the one thing we can't do in here is add lights. But that's pretty good. There are other things. I can show you something called Adobe Stager, or Substance Stager, sorry, which is like a renderer that's attached to this package group, like Designer, Painter, and Stager, which you can add lights into, but we'll do that another day. And then we can go back to Paint. There we go. I'm just going to change this back to 3D only. There we go. I'm going to turn off mirror. So on the right hand side here, we've got texture set list. Now we can see we've got 3 Lamberts there. Those are the 3 Lamberts we attached before. So that top Lambert is, actually I will have to bring this back like that. This top Lambert is that first group. The second Lambert is the exterior of the bottom big box. And the third Lambert is the interior of the box. So that's how Substance is actually splitting them up. And each one of those, depending on what I'm doing with my layers here, each one of those will have different, if I add a bunch of layers in like Lambert 1, you'll be able to see them. Then if I switch to Lambert 2, there'll be the layers that are associated with Lambert 2. So that's one thing to kind of think about. If you're working on something, you'll have to jump in between these different Lamberts. We can rename them. Because obviously, I don't necessarily know what Lambert 2 SG is. So if I can re-click it. Main bits. I always do that. Main bits. Biots. There you go. Anyway, so you can name them. And you can also turn them off. So you can even hide them. Which is very, 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 very useful. So I'm going to go for this one. So the big box. And interior box. There you go. So that's the texture set list. Like that. And the only thing left to look at now is underneath here, you've got layers. They're layers. And you've got your texture set settings. Now, this is where I was saying before that Substance is super awesome with what you can do. You can jump in between these different things. So what I'm going to do is grab a material with a particularly nice detail to it. I'll get something with some nice kind of, okay, black, like that. There you go.
Sorry, where did you get that from?
I'm not going to tell you. Because this is a smart material. I'm just doing this to demonstrate something. So at the minute, we're working at a size 1024. So our textures are all 1024. At least on this selected set list. If I change this to 128, it flips to 128. Which means if I do any big processes on this, it only needs to do it to a 128 process. But then, this is where the really clever stuff is. If I do something on there, so I'll add a layer, I'll add a paint layer, and I'm just going to paint some really horrible, really low res texture like that, and even make it really small. So your Photoshop keys work in this as well, so your brackets to size up and size down your keys. So I'm going to make a really small, like that, so it's crunchy. Go here, and I go all the way up to 4K. There you go. And then everything I do, it kind of understands how to then interpret that into the higher resolutions. So now I've got a much finer, where's my mouse? There we go. Much finer. Oh, Alt left mouse, Alt middle mouse, Alt right mouse. Just like in Maya, which is lovely. So there, so I love that Substance can do that. You can work big strokes on a lower resolution to make sure you get all that major information in there. And then when you come to make really, really fine detail stuff, which might take a long time to process, but you need to have that information, you can go up a resolution and you can go to what you need. Because even here you can see that we've got all that beautiful like detail for the normal map. Beautiful stuff. And inside there's a lot of stuff we don't need to necessarily worry about. Channels, these are all the things that are associated with our object. So we've got a base color and stuff, height, and roughness, metallic and normal, which we're going to talk about in a second. These normal mixing, we don't need to worry about any of these kind of combined, sharp, we don't need to worry about any of them. Mesh maps is how I can get things, if I stall for time, like this. So baking mesh maps is how I get something with this resolution, with wrinkles and all this kind of stuff, on a surface that is this density. Because all that really craggy information, if I did it physical geometry, needs millions and millions and millions of polygons, like 20 million, 40 million polygons to achieve all the pores and wrinkles and stuff. But obviously I can't take that into a game engine, so what I've got to do is make a low poly version of it, and I bake the maps down, I bake all that high resolution information down onto a lower poly version of it. So that's my high poly, and this is my sculpt. So that's got all the high poly information on it. And in Substance Painter, we can take a high poly information, a high poly model, and pull all the really high poly information off onto a low poly. Now we're only going to do really, really basic stuff, so we're not obviously dealing with this. But what this whole process is, the bake mesh maps, is about pulling high resolution information onto a low resolution model, so that we can have smoke and mirrors. We can make it look like there's tons of information, when really there's not. Because this really nice rendered head is just this resolution, just with clever maps and lighting. It's like I was saying in like one of the first sessions, that a lot of what makes 3D really good is how we texture stuff and how we light stuff. You could have a really beautiful geometric model, but then if it's textured really badly, all that work goes to naught. But then you could texture it really well, but then if you light it badly, same thing. It isn't very well represented. You're not showing off your work. There you go. So that's what we use these for. And there's other weirdness that we'll get to as because we're going to do one of those I do something, you do it, I do something, you do it kind of processes today, just so we can get into it. Oh, has anyone used Substance before?
I tried to before Christmas.
Okay.
Didn't go very well.
Okay. Has anybody used, like in Blender, have you done like the node-based stuff where you kind of choose like edgeware and you kind of see a lot of obviously there's no node network in this, but the same jazz. Because basically what we can do is choose to use certain things to produce edgeware. We can have use ambient occlusion to produce like rust, and I'm like, oh, it's so fun. I love texturing. And again, it's super easy because there's not many things that we need to kind of think about. A lot of it's very artistic. So yeah, so let me just make I'm gonna make a new thing altogether and just bring in that file again. So we start off from scratch. PBR like that. Boodly up. Boom, there you go. Right then. So on the left hand side as well, I should have actually shown you that a minute ago. I'll do this one instead. There we go. So on the left hand side, what we have is a bunch of menus. So at the very top, we've got some brush sizes, flow, max size, that simple Photoshop stuff. Jitter. So do we understand what jitter is in Photoshop? Anyone hazard to guess at jitter? If I have something like size jitter, so you can kind of see the preview going there, it basically will jump randomly between different sizes. Flow jitter does the same thing. So flow jitter will jump randomly between, if I max it out, it goes randomly between like 0 and 100% flow. Angle jitter, if I have a nice, there you go. So angle jitter will basically randomize the angle. And position jitter will randomize the position. And these are all in Photoshop as well. Just basic kind of stuff in Photoshop. But this is fun stuff we can do. If we do want to do some painting, obviously you want to make sure things aren't as mechanical or kind of obviously painted. You want to make stuff look natural. So you can use some of these to really kind of like make things look sporadic and messy. When we come to it, we'll talk about alignment and screen space, but we won't be doing it just yet. And here's where it gets substancy. We've got the alpha, which is what we're painting with, but then we've got like different ways. Each brush, the more technical brushes, will have parameters. So you've got the alpha there, but I can change the alpha to do slightly different things. So, as you can see, the alpha is changing because of my bend. And the offset, I can make them very far apart. So some brushes will have parameters depending on what it is. And these are all done in behind the scenes. So we won't be actually making these kind of things. You can do, like this is more of a tech artist kind of thing. So you can produce these kind of things in stuff like Designer and then bring them into Substance. Or you can, I don't know how, this is very clever stuff. I don't actually know how to do this. This is not my kind of field. You can also invert it. Now here's where it gets really cool. At the very bottom, very bottom, we've got the materials. And this is where we need to do some more note taking. So, I'll do it on this side. Base color or color is just color. Basic. So base color is just color. Obviously it's spelled wrong. Is it spelled wrong? It is spelled wrong, obviously. You might also hear or see the term albedo. Has anybody seen the term albedo? What does it mean? Or what does it represent, I should say. Not what because it means something very technical. But what is it for? What's it represent?
Roughness?
No, base colour. That's all it means. It's just base colour. It's a very scientific way of explaining the colour of something. And you might also see the old-fashioned term diffuse, which is an old-fashioned term for colour map. But base colour is colour. Height or bump is to do with not necessarily physical height, but perceived height, stuff that is done in camera. Although, what we can do inside game engines is if you're doing like an open world terrain thing, you can create I should say, this is an RGB map. What does RGB stand for? Red, green, blue. Has anyone ever seen the term CMYK? What is the difference between CMYK and RGB? CMYK is for printing. So if you're in Photoshop, make sure you're not set to CMYK if you're doing stuff for screen. The CMYK is cyan, yellow, magenta, black, which is printing. So a lot of these maps as well, it's just all black and white. Like you can see there, black and white. It's so simple. Bump or height, we call it height in this, is just a black and white map. If you think of 50% grey as the floor, the lighter you go, the higher you go, the darker you go, the deeper you go. So what you can do in game engines is produce in Photoshop or something, there's softwares that can do this. You can produce like a top-down black and white version of your terrain and then apply it to like a massive piece of geometry in the engine, and it will then kind of create it will use those black and white coordinates as basically push up and down vertexes. That's a physical way of adjusting it, but inside here, it's all in camera. It's not actually adjusting this whatsoever. It's all giving the impression of height. Is there... So not really doing anything. I'll find some examples later on of height. Right. Roughness. Guess what that controls? Roughness. There's the black sheep, the discarded brother or sister of roughness, called glossness, which is the opposite. So with roughness, 0, super shiny. So you'll see if I bring that roughness down, it's very, very shiny. If I bring that roughness, I'm in the wrong. Let's find a thing that is actually. There we go. I think stains control it. I'll just set this up quickly because I've actually picked the wrong material to show you this. This is a bit of a fancy material. So I delete. Oh yeah, we've got groups inside this as well. So just like groups inside Photoshop, we've got groups inside Substance. Okay. So I'll make fill layer. Okay, so base color just turns the entire thing whatever color. Height, we've not got anything to put height in it, but I'll show you that in a bit. So roughness, if I turn that all the way to 0, super shiny. If I increase that, obviously we get rougher and rougher till we get essentially like that black paint. What? Matte? Not matte. It's past matte. It's what's it called?
Black point 3 or something.
That black paint that.
Yeah, I think it's black point 3 because.
Is it even dark? Is it even matter than? Yeah, that like.
Even darker than black or something like that.
Vanta
Vanta
Black.
black.
Yeah.
Yes. So Vanta black. So just like in black and white values in painting, we don't necessarily want to go to completely 0 or completely white. Because if I go completely 0, at least as your base roughness, if I go completely 0 as a base roughness, I can't go any shinier. If I go completely 1 as my base roughness, I can't go any rougher. So we kind of middle in the middle, and then we can use our additional stuff to push it even further. So roughness, dead easy. 0, completely shiny. 1, completely rough. Metallic. What does that control? Oh, this is also black and white. Metallic. What does that control? I haven't spelled metallic. Louder. What does it control? The metalness. It's sometimes called metalness. It's sometimes called metallic.
Is that a word?
What?
Is it a word, that?
What? Metallic.
Metalness?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. I'm gonna get it spelled. Yeah. Okay. Again, black and white map. So the base understanding of this, when you first start off, is nothing should be grey. You can use greys for like really being fine-tuning with this, but as a base understanding, if it's black, it's not metal. If it's white, it's metal. So if I bring this roughness all the way down to 0, and have my metal all the way down to 0, we've essentially got shiny plastic. And here, you can see the difference between like how metal and plastic reflect stuff. So if I up it to 100, then we're getting essentially red tinted chrome. And it's really funny if you start to play with like the different colours and how it reacts. So, because technically, chrome isn't black, but it's very dark grey. Technically, if you were to, in the world, flip everything, like take away all the lights and stuff and reflections. But that's metallic. Black and white, super, super awesome. And then we've got normal. Now, normal is our really awesome map, which is a RGB map, because it uses all the colours. However, we don't paint with this. We don't physically, like, we can physically do stuff with this, but we don't really use this directly. This is a byproduct of a combination of a lot of these different things. This will create, it's kind of like height. So if I actually draw this on the board, so obviously the video you won't be able to see this, but if I have a cone, like think of a speaker cone, it's always my best example. From the side, you get the bulb in the middle, that's a speaker cone. And if I create something like that as a 2D image, if I create that under the height map, so from the top it looks okay, it's casting some form of shadow, because it's being like calculated, but as I start to tilt my camera, what I get is that. I don't get the impression of depth. And the shadows will not look right. Because height only works in a vertical black and white up and down kind of thing. The thing with normal is you're using all the different color values. So even though I might tilt my camera and I get something like this, the shadows will look far more realistic. It'll give me a better impression of something that's meant to look like it goes in. At the very beginning, we did look at some examples of normal maps. But I will also, I can show you again, can't I? And you can see this stuff in Sketchfab. You know, if you just go on Sketchfab and just look at stuff, you'll be able to see, you know, go and inspect people's things. You'll be able to see normal maps in use all over the shop. If I get once again, if I bring Laura back, this is my best example for this. Why are you so small? There we go. So a normal map. There you go. A normal map uses all the colours of the rainbow, but if you got like salmon pink from the top, the opposite of salmon pink is going to be at the bottom. If you've got teal from the right, the opposite of, looking at this, if you've got pink from the right, you'll have teal on the left. So basically, if a light's hitting on the right hand side, it's hitting on that pink and salmon section. The opposite of that is going to be saying, okay, the shadow going to be on here, because it's all in camera. Like the camera and the lights and stuff are all working together, be thinking like, okay, this is what's going to happen. But it's also what gives us these wrinkles and stuff, because they cast shadows. I don't know how well it's going to be on this renderer, but how do I rotate the light? Okay, so I can't rotate the light in here for some reason. There we go, that's a better example. So, all these shadows being cast here, they're not actually there. It's all down to the normal map. All these little wrinkles that are having shadows cast on the inside of them, all these small little things here in the neck and stuff, it's all normal maps. Wrinkles here around the eyes. Obviously the major wrinkles, so like where the form turns around here, obviously they're proper geometric shadows, but the really small stuff inside the wrinkles, it's all normal maps. Which is really cool. And for this, that's all we really need to use. There are other things. There is subsurface scattering, which is how we get porosity in skin, or if we make a really porous rubber, you know, like speed balls and stuff, like bouncing balls. Make that kind of look like that. We can add so the light. Does anyone know what subsurface scattering is or means, or can kind of say an example? We've all done at some point in our life the classic
Wait.
subsurface scattering.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah, we've all done that as kids, haven't we? So that's subsurface scattering, because that's light passing through the porosity of the skin, bouncing around, and then only some of it is coming out, so that's why it's red. But it's also reflecting the hemoglobin of the inside of the skin, so that's why it's red as well. Which is really, really cool. So that's subsurface scattering. You also got other maps as well. A lot of them we won't use, because some of them are for very, very, very specific reasons. that we won't use. But this is our main group. Colour for colour, height to indicate it's working with normal essentially, roughness to control roughness, metallic to control metallic. Super, super simple. Questions so far? No? Cool. So, our normal layer stack here. Another great thing about this is I can choose to only paint with certain things. So if I only want to paint with colour, I can hold Alt and press colour, or I can just basically go through and pick what I want. So I only want to paint with colour. I'll pick my colour and I'll paint. And it stops me from painting on things I'm not connected to as well, because I'm only on that first one. I make another layer. Now this one I only want to paint with roughness. So I turn off everything but roughness, and I want to make it super shiny. So that's why my roughness is 0. There we go. So as I paint, you can see there that this is very, very fun. If I only want to paint with height, I'm going to push that in, so I'm going to really go sick with it. Again, the height, you don't want to go all the way one way or the other. Height is very, you have to be very kind of like gentle with height. The higher the resolution of your texture, the better the height map's going to look. But even then, it looks really crispy. So with this, I give the impression of height. I can even do it the opposite way and push it out. And then metal. So I can paint that 100% metal. And I can even combine some of these together. So I'm going to go super non-rough. So I'm painting in chrome essentially. So you can be really, really adaptive with what you're actually doing. But this also ties into my favorite layer system, the fill layer. So that's paint layer, which is just a paintbrush. Add layer. The fill layer, like I said, just fills the whole thing with color. And I can go through and decide, right, my base color. How I kind of work is I go base color first. What's my base color going to be? My base color is going to be horrible lime green. And I only want to paint with that, so I'm going to turn everything except color off. My next fill layer is only going to be roughness. So I'm going to turn everything. Now you can see if I turn roughness off, there's no color off. There's no color on there, so it goes away. Now with this, I can control the entire thing, the entire layer, just from here. So I can say, okay, that whole layer is going to be this. I'm going to go for another layer, and this again is just going to be metal, like that. Now the reason I do this is because if I'm going through and thinking, oh yeah, that looks really good, but my director comes up and goes, oh, it's not going to be lime green, it's going to be neon pink. I can go, okay, cool. All you have to do is change this to neon pink. It's really, really adaptable. Same thing for a lot of these different layers. If I need to go through and do a base kind of coverage, it's really easy for me to do. And I can name them, obviously. So I'll go for double click, color, spell it right. Oh, I always do it.
Just leave it.
It bugs me. It really bugs me. It's my dyslexic little finger. Roughness. With a T apparently. And metal. So I can name stuff like that. Which is really fun. And then when I go and do other more kind of in-depth things, I can use other fill layers for that. I like control. Whenever I'm texturing, I like to be really, really in control, which means I have a lot of layers. One thing I don't do in Substance is have like one layer for everything. Like in Photoshop, that's the difference between like painting in Photoshop and painting in Substance, is you can't necessarily do everything on one layer. And you shouldn't do everything on one layer. Because if you make a mess up, where are you going to go? It's not as easy to fix textures as it is to fix paintings. Especially if you go in there and use like more layers and stuff. The last thing before I start going off and doing some stuff is here, and a lot of people at the beginning completely forget about this, and I sometimes still forget about this. Top of my layers there, we've got where it says base color. I can drop that down. So I've got my normal, I can use the same blending layers just like in Photoshop, but these are all associated with the color layer. If I bring this down to say height, now we're doing everything to do with height. So to make height work properly, it has to be a linear dodge, because that's the way that black and white works properly together. But then again, I've got my opacity, so I can bring in something really heavy as a height layer and be like really, really granular with it. And then I can use that particular layer to be like, okay, I'm gonna start to pull that down that opacity to basically control that strength a little bit. And we've got all those, so you can go through and like adjust the roughness, which is what I generally do near the end or near kind of like a major kind of milestone. Is I'll go through and then just start to, if I get everything looking pretty good, if I'm thinking, oh, some of this stuff needs to be a bit more kind of brought back, chilled out a bit, I can come in here and decide, okay, yeah, my roughness map needs to be chilled out in that specific bit. I'll find that layer, I'll go to my roughness, and I'll bring down the opacity again, just to kind of fine tune control. So it is all very, just closed it. It is all very much like Photoshop, except you've just got a few more things to keep track of. Obviously in Photoshop we've got one layer for everything, but here we've got a layer per channel. We've got all things, we can choose all these different channels. But again, for me, that's why I work in like these big, like I do a color thing, and then I do a metal thing, and then I do a roughness thing. Because then, even though I'm adding a lot more things, if I mess up on something, it's only going to be associated with one thing. Either color, roughness, metallic, whatever. Cool. And I'm also going to show us how we can separate, because obviously everything I've done here has gone over all this. So obviously, this is going to be a different material to this, and so on and so forth. So we're also going to look into how we can change that. But yeah, try not to get overwhelmed with this. There really shouldn't be any reason why we do get majorly overwhelmed with it. It is just like Photoshop. It's just we have to basically split our brain between different channels. Cool. So before we have, what time is it? 10:30. Before we have a quick 10-minute, has anyone got any questions? Anything I need to repeat or re-explain?
You know the little drop down under where it says layers?
Yeah.
When you change one of the layers on there, does it affect all of them or just the one you're talking about?
Just what I'm talking about. So, well, oh no, so all these will change the base color, and they'll all change the roughness. But then it'll only affect the one I'm actually physically affecting. So if I want to change this roughness level, it's only obviously going to be a change in that particular layer in the roughness. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just struggling to keep up with it.
It's cool. When you get your hands on it, it'll make complete sense. Any others? Cool. Awesome. Right. Cool. Yeah. So let's get a 15 minutes. So get back to 5:02, and then we're going to do that step by step. I do something, you do it. I do something, you do it, kind of thing.
Do that anytime you like. Careful where I am brushed it, so it's probably a bit too much.
Do you want to turn the lights off for us again, please? Dominic, it's your job now. She's gone. Turn the lights off for us, please. And I'll stop the recording.